Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, as always, Objectively Dan, doing the show from my apartment once again, but joining me, as someone does every week on this show, because we get a special guest every single Friday at 7 p.m. Central Time, Jenna H, who you probably don't know.
Hey,
Jenna, because Jenna is a personal friend of mine that we used to go way back to middle school with, and is also the thumbnail artist for this show. So if you ever wonder, hey, who's making all that crazy, awesome art? Well, this is her.
that's me.
Yeah. So the reason why I brought Jenna on was, one, it's cool to see who does the art and stuff, but Jenna used to know me when I was a Christian, and Jenna was also a Christian at that time too. And now we're both atheists, and we kind of both grew up in a similar religious environment out in Waco, Texas. And so I thought it would be fun to kind of talk about what that's like, because I do get asked, like, what's it like growing up in Waco? You know, what people thought of me when I was a Christian after I had changed, and kind of how you got roped in with Truth Wanted, Jenna. So I wanted to kind of start with So I just want to kind of start with, what's your religious background? You know, how did you go from Christian to atheist? Like, let's just start from there.
Well, I mean, like most people, I was just born to be, well, actually, originally my family was Catholic, but then they turned Protestant. So by the time I was it was Protestant. Mm-hmm. And we usually stuck to Nazarene. And so that's where I was. And then, eventually we moved to Waco, and I don't know. That's how it started.
Right. And so we went to, I would say, I mean, what would you say, Jenna? I'd say the vast majority of our school populace was pretty devoutly Christian, like even more so than you might see in a typical Baptist. American school. Yeah, we had a lot of Baptists where we grew up. And so by the time I was in high school, I went to a Baptist church. But I'd say that the most prominent, like, after school activity for most kids at our school, like, was youth group, right? Like, it more so than anything else.
I think, like, the youth group. There was the big youth group to be in.
Yeah, we
weren't in it.
No, yeah. So there was this one big youth group that was like almost a clique at our school, which I thought was pretty funny looking back in retrospect. But like, I guess I kind of wanted to frame this because, like, there's a lot of people that talk about how some people just stay the way that they are and they don't change. And Jenna, I would have never thought that you or I would have ever changed our particular religious beliefs. To looking back, that's crazy. And just considering everybody that we knew, and the way that we grew up. And so, like, how did you start to lose that religious identity? What was that process like for you?
I think always something that really stressed me out about religion was I think that in some way, in order to be religious, you have to have a bit of a competitive streak in you, which is something I don't really have. So whenever I would get told from, like, pastors and preachers, like, oh, well, you're not doing enough. You need to give more money. You need to pray more. You need to be, like, more Christian, and you're never good enough, and you always have to be more. I was like, I'm getting really stressed out by this. And I, like, always felt so guilty because I was like, I'm not praying enough. I'm not doing all this shit that they tell me to do. And then, like, my family, especially my dad, was also very, very pressuring. Like, if I liked anything, it would be like, well, why aren't you liking God that much? Like, I would draw, like, stupid little pictures, and my dad would be like, well, how does this relate to God? And I remember I had to, like, excuse why I liked things by relating them to God. Like, whenever I talked about Zelda, he's like, well, Link breaks the pots the way that Jesus breaks the pots or some shit. And then I was like, I had to, like, relate it back. And then I liked Evanescence a lot. And luckily, people think she's Christian. So that was, like, an easy pass.
Yeah.
And then I liked... whenever I liked wolves, because I went through a wolf phase, I remember drawing a picture of a wolf while I was in church, and it said on it like, "Save the wolves." And my dad was like, "Why don't you worry about saving your own soul?" And like, so I couldn't even like anything, and I just got really, really tired of it by the time I was able to think more independently.
Yeah, and when would you say that was?
But I didn't,
because I think it was around the same time for both of us, right around college.
Yeah, definitely when I think really what jump-started everything was my parents getting divorced, because with my dad out of the picture, he also ruined the relationship that we had with the church that we went to. So it was really awkward together. So a lot of times we just didn't go. And then my wife, who I met in that church, she would still go and I would go with her, but it was just kind of different because then she also stopped going because I wouldn't go. And then in general, like once I moved out, we just stopped going altogether. And I was done at that point. I didn't really want to, but my wife was still really into it. So I was still like praying and doing that shit for her. But then I think whenever she started getting, she's very smart. She reads a lot. And so I think when she started her deconversion is when I was officially comfortable actually labeling myself as atheist.
Yeah.
Because I would still try.
I think that's funny though.
At work, but I was like,
that's so funny that you got married to a woman first before you lost your religious beliefs. I don't know. Like that's
no, we became atheists a month or two before our wedding.
Okay. So,
isn't that funny?
Yeah. So like that's not uncommon though. And to me, just the way that I grew up and the way that I understood sexuality as a Christian, that was like, you just straight up just could not be gay and be Christian. Like that wasn't even a construct that existed. But like when you find someone you love, right, and you still have this God belief, like I think people just kind of make it work. And I think that's true for y'all's story at least. But something else I wanted to touch on, you talked about this idea of competitiveness. And I think that's super true from the way that we grow up. I don't know if that just stems from a Baptist culture specifically, but there was definitely this idea amongst a lot of the people that I knew growing up. Like it's almost like when people talk about, wanted to show how holy they are. They wanted to show how Christian they were. They would like give the great Christian answers in class or something. I don't know. Or they would talk about some specific Bible verse. They like there was this pressure to conform to this idea of being a good Christian. And I think I gotta assume that's weird for a lot of people who didn't grow up in an environment like that. But like that was kind of the reality of where we were, right?
Yeah, and it was funny too because like we were saying earlier, it was like all the cool kids. Of course, I was not cool. Especially I wasn't cool because I showed a lot of the like symptoms of being a lesbian, so I couldn't fit in with them. And we were like, and it was the same thing. Like I went to all these church camps because my wife was homeschooled, so she went to a lot of church camps, and I would always go with her because she would always ask me because she couldn't get along with anyone because she was also like had lesbian symptoms and I had lesbian symptoms. And it was always such an uncomfortable place to be because I always knew, like, I didn't know that it was because I was a lesbian. I was like, I'm too dykey, only that wouldn't be the word I used. And like, I just don't fit in with these people. And that was just like what we were always surrounded with.
Yeah.
And always proving how much better they were than everyone else. And something that I couldn't compete in because I couldn't pretend to be like that. And so it was just like awkward watching it. And then seeing these people also try and prove themselves to their pastors all the time. And it's gross because it's like, it's one man, it's one dude. And our pastor was also like an asshole. So like seeing all these people just like grovel at his feet, it's just gross and I hate it.
Yeah. So there's definitely, and this is something I try to bring up with people when talking about Christianity, at least in this country, is because I think a lot of people who talk about these issues make the mistake of strictly treating Christianity as an ideology or a set of propositions by which someone believes in. And that's just, it's really not the case for a lot of people. That may be how we see it as secular people, since we want to kind of dissect it, right? But like for the average Christian, I think part of it is an identity thing. It's like how you fit into your group, how you fit in and navigate your social world. And you talked about like you presented as lesbian and like you got judgment for that. And I definitely remember seeing that, not just with you, but with other people who went to our school and kids who came out at the time. And this was like the early 2010s. So like that was still kind of a new thing. I like newer for Waco. Yeah, newer for Waco, I should say. And like I remember people talking so much shit about some of the kids that came out at our school. And it was always, you know, only a handful of kids ever did. But you could see that judgment there. And you could see that pressure to conform, right?
Every time I knew someone was gay, of course I was homophobic because what choice did I have? But I was always so attracted to the gay people. Like I was always like, please let me be your, you got something going on and I'm about it. And so I would always be friends with these people, but then I would bully them. But I kind of bullied all my friends because I'm emotionally stunted or something. I always describe our friendship, how it started between the two of us, as like we bullied each other. And like we just couldn't stop. We had so much fun bullying each other that we became really good friends.
Yeah, I think we were kind of, looking back, it's almost as if, you know, we didn't always feel like we fit in with a lot of people. We were kind of, I don't want to say like a Breakfast Club situation, because I don't think it was that dramatic, but it was, you know, that's middle of the pack, I think. I don't know if we particularly stood out, but you know, that's high school, right? That's people's experiences, you know, growing up. I think it's interesting to see. I would be very curious to see what other people who grew up alongside us think about issues now in 2020 than they did back then. Because I know a lot of them, you know, and other people obviously get that experience too, but also our generations in particular, growing up with social media, I feel like we also have a different lens to the world than previous generations in looking at a lot of, especially the social issues we see now. So I don't know if most people that are our age are as hardcore in their Christianity as before. I'm sure some of them are, but maybe, you know, maybe there's some flexibility there. I've had different conversations. I mean, obviously we changed, right? Like, and I didn't think we would. So, you know, I'd be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised, rather, in seeing other people change in you know, those kinds of circumstances. So let's talk about this. So you found we were friends for a long time. We were friends through high school. Then we kind of went to college, and then we kind of stopped talking. We went to different colleges, you know, whatever. How did you find me again? And tell that story, because that's fun.
Oh, so when my wife was deconverting, and of course I was deconverting with her because I can't read, and she reads to me, so she always tells me everything. So she was telling me all about these atheists that she was getting into. She was showing me videos, and I was watching them with her because I thought they were so cool and so interesting and so smart. And then she's like, oh, you should need to watch this guy, Cosmic Skeptic. Cosmic Skeptic does a great job. He's so well read and like cool. And so we were like getting really into him. We were watching a whole bunch of his videos. And then up pops you on his couch.
Yeah. Well, actually, and it was genetically modified skeptic, not Cosmic Skeptic.
Oh yeah. My bad.
Yeah.
I know the difference,
but yeah, I was in one of his
genetically modified skeptic.
Yeah, I was in one of his videos, and then you Drew. Yeah, you Facebook messaged me out of the blue asking me if that was me.
Yeah.
And I said yeah. And then like seeing me in some atheist video, right? Kind of crazy.
Yeah, it was so weird.
Yeah, and then we
it was funny because Bella's like, is that I was like, that's Daniel. She's like, Daniel, the guy that you always fought with? And I was like, yes, him. And she said that she remembers us being in church, in youth group, me talking about us fighting. Yeah. And like, she's like, why are you friends with him? I was like, because it's so much fun.
Yeah. Well,
and then even looking back at the message before I messaged you about Drew is us fighting.
yeah, probably. And so that's kind of fun. Like, and you're not the only person I've talked to, because my story is pretty public, like I have the privilege of being able to share what I was like when I was Christian, the kind of before and after. And so because of that, there have been other people that I've known in kind of my Christian life that have kind of found it that I never explicitly told. And so like, you're not the only one with that, but eventually, we started talking more, and then I got you to collaborate by making thumbnails on Truth Wanted. And now,
which was so cool. It was such a great opportunity.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that we could make that happen. And I just think this story is interesting because like people feel like people keep saying that people don't change, like, and like people really do. Like, it's just like, I don't know, some of the most conservative people I knew growing up are now super liberal. And sometimes vice versa too. Sometimes people who are not are more left leaning have become, and changed their ideas. And so like people are just way more malleable than you might think. And like, I don't know, I encourage people who haven't talked to some people they used to know just to see what they're like on these kinds of issues, because you never know what you can learn from this kind of stuff.
And then of course too, like, I mean, I love looking at people on Facebook and creeping and whatever, but like the stuff they post is not reflective of their opinions on things. So you can even if you see them say that, like, you still have to hold that with a grain of salt, because like, you don't know exactly what they think. And like, I always give a lot of, I try to be very understanding of people who believe things that I don't like, because I personally have gone through so much change myself that I always give people that benefit of the doubt. Like, I know everyone is capable of change. So I don't know. And I think it's a happier live, just trying to do your best to understand that everyone is trying to do the right thing. And even if what they're doing is not the right thing objectively, that is what they think is the right thing, Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Some people are just mean, but
well, there's different value systems. I think our values changed over time, really. I think that was a big part of it too. And like, because we grew up with like small town values. Like, Waco is not a small town by a technical definition, right? But it has a small town mindset. Yeah, it's getting bigger, but like I do separate, population size doesn't necessarily dictate the culture that you might get. And I think Waco in particular is kind of an epitome of that. So anyway, that's what it's like growing up in Waco. Oh, and also the David Koresh stuff, I think people ask us all the time. Like, that every Wacoan will tell you it didn't actually happen in Waco. It happened like 30 minutes outside of Waco.
Mount Carmel.
Yeah, not in the city limits, but it's always marketed that way. So anyway, we actually have a whole bunch of calls in our call queue. So I want to go ahead and just
jump straight
to calls. You ready?
I'm so nervous.
Yeah, well,
please be kind to me, y'all.
This first call is special because this was somebody else that we talked to a bit before the show, who we also grew up with. So now we have 3 people from Waco who wants to share her experiences.
And I also started talking to this person recently about religion.
Yeah, and so
it's like,
Katie,
it's all coming full circle.
Katie from Waco, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hello. Well, I'm actually just sitting in my car. I'm about to go back to Waco to see some family.
There you go.
And so yeah, I just I've been doing a lot of deconstructing of my faith lately, so that's been interesting.
Yeah, and so we were talking before, and you had mentioned this, and I thought, what a great opportunity for, I asked if you were willing to come on the show and talk about this, because we are all 3 people from Waco who are deconstructing our faith, and I think that's interesting. I don't know, because again, like, you wouldn't expect it from the people around us, and yet here we are. So like, what's that journey been like for you, Katie?
Well, it's been, a lot of it is just like I had some really bad experiences in the church, just with like abusive relationships with guys, and just the church telling me that, you know, I just need to pray away my problems, and, you know, just like treating me like I don't have enough faith.
Yeah, see, that's that competitiveness.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about. Like, you're not a good enough Christian to run with the dogs, so you're always feeling bad about yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just made me like start questioning, like, if God really does love me that much, you know, why would he want me to work so hard to earn his favor?
Exactly.
So me
that was something that like just never made sense to me.
Yeah. So it's like, is this even like for real? Like, and if it is for real, like, why would I want to worship a God like that?
And something else that you mentioned to me earlier, Katie, was you studied in your college classes. You actually studied some of the Bible and did some like Christian classes, right? And that kind of also shook you in some ways.
Yeah. Well, it just like that was my freshman year of college. I was taking a Old Testament Bible class, and my professor basically just explained to us that the Bible was made by man, you know, like it was put together by man. Man decided what got put into it. And they basically decided what the word of God was. And so I was like, well, is it even really the word of God then? Because if it's made by man and it's written by man, then it's humanly flawed.
Yep.
Yeah, like until I really started to understand the opinions of like mainstream biblical scholarship, I did not understand the Bible. I thought I did, you know, I thought I had the general outlines, but I didn't know the who, what, where, and whys of the creation of the text. And digging more into that, you start to see like, oh, there is like secular explanations for why you see some of the things in here, you know, and maybe this doesn't sound as divinely inspired as you thought when you take into account certain contexts, right? You know, people always talk about, oh, you have to read the Bible in context, but like, if you really look at it in context, sometimes it doesn't give you the answer you want either. So yeah, that. And
why would you have to do all of these, like, why would you have to jump all these hoops to read the Bible in the right context? Like, why would God do that to you? Like, why would he set you up for failure so bad? Like, that's what I don't understand either. And it's like, what denomination is right? Because you can read the Bible in so many different ways. There's so many different denominations. No one can make up their minds on what they mean. And like, if you don't make up your mind, or I mean, like, if you make up your mind in the wrong way, which one is gonna send you to heaven or hell? Or if you're all gonna go to heaven because you believe in God, or and you're any denomination, then why have these denominations?
Yeah, like, it gets confusing. It gets confusing really fast. But Katie, I want to know now, now that you've kind of asked yourself these questions and you've deconstructed, do you have a label for where you're at right now, or is that something you're still processing?
Well, I'm still kind of processing everything. I would probably label myself as agnostic right now. But I've definitely walked away from the Christianity label. Like, I'm not going back to that. But I'm still like, I don't know if maybe there is some sort of supernatural spirit out there. And so I've kind of been exploring in Wicca and witchcraft, just because I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in the divine aspect of it. Yeah.
What I really like about Wicca and witchcraft is, I mean, whether you end up believing it or not, but I definitely see what's so appealing about it as far as people that were Christians. Because I see a lot of people that were Christians and they go to Wicca. It might just be because of the people I see. But I see that a lot of the appeal of it is the appreciation of nature. And I think that you're taught in Christianity to use up what's around you. God gave you these resources, just use them up. Doesn't matter. And Wicca and witchcraft and paganism, those sorts of things, as far as I understand it, are very opposite of that. They're always like this is what the earth has given you, appreciate it, take care of it. And like whenever you look and see the environmental impact that we've had, I definitely understand why it is such an attractive religion to a lot of people that were on the other side of the environmental impact.
Yeah, you know, I can definitely see the attractiveness of the religion. I mean, the aesthetic is kind of cool, you know, and the rituals and the spells and stuff. I mean, all that is kind of neat, I think, in concept. I think the reason why I could never myself identify as a Wicca, at least not at this point, would pretty much be, you know, the lack of demonstrable evidence of any of the kind of rituals or spells doing what they set out to do. And I don't mean in like, oh, well, if you do this spell, it's going to make you feel good. You know, like that's kind of too vague for me. I think you definitely find a section of the Wicca community that's like, no, we're going to do this stuff and a storm is going to happen, or this election is going to go this way or another, you know? And like, that's just clear signs to me where it's like, well, if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work the way you think it does, you know? So that would be hard for me to kind of go down that path, I guess. But I don't know. What do you think about that, Katie?
Yeah, I think that's where the difference between Wicca and witchcraft comes in, because you can be Wiccan and a witch, but you can be a witch without being Wiccan.
Okay.
So like you can be an atheist and still practice witchcraft. And not like believe in any deities or spirits or anything. That's true. But
you're
like,
right.
You can like, use the science as magic.
The science as magic? Can you explain that a bit more for me? I don't know what that means.
Basically, everything that we thought was magic in the past is science. You know, like we had alchemy and you know, and astrology and all that. And it ends up being science. And so any sort of like magic is like just unexplained science.
Yeah, there's that Isaac Asimov quote, right? Where he's like, you know, what science fiction or what science would develop tomorrow is basically what seems like magic to us today. You know, and the more that our technology develops and the less explanations the common person has for it, it just kind of seems like magic. You know, I'm paraphrasing that quote. I didn't say it like that, but yeah, I definitely see where that sentiment comes from. But I also make the distinction, I think, because when people use magic, generally they're using it in a specific context that's like against kind of the material laws of the world, right? Like that's what magic would be to me. If Jenna could start floating off of her sofa right now and there wasn't like a draft or something, or I don't know, any material explanation I could give for it, that's something I could call magic. But you know, the things with our scientific developments, there's still an explanation for a lot of what we see, even if we don't fully understand the mechanics. You know, we oftentimes operate under the assumption that it's still following physical and material laws. So, I just like to make that distinction because, like, I think science is cool and it is magical to use one sense of the word, but I definitely try to be super careful not to conflate in those two different senses. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. So one last question.
I think another thought that I have.
Go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, another thought that I have about like Wicca paganism in general is a lot of these religions stem from Irish, you know, that over in that area. And I feel like the reason why it is so popular over here is because those are our descendants. So it's the religion around nature that is available to a lot of Americans. And I mean, like, I'm just going to talk in context of America. So I feel like that's why we stick to it. And it's not necessarily because it's the best one around nature, but because it is what is available. And I think there's a lot of really great things that come with focusing on nature. And I think as long as you understand them to all be scientific, I think a lot of like the spell stuff, as long as you understand the scientific limits of it, I think it can be a good way for people to meditate and self-reflect. which I think is in general the thing that gives me makes me feel more calm about people being religious, as long as they use it as a form of self-reflection, then that can only do good, as long as they understand the scientific limitations.
Yeah, like a developed practice of observance, of self-reflection, or observance of nature. Like, yeah, that's something we could vibe with, right? But I also don't, I don't feel like I need an organized set of beliefs in that sense, or religious beliefs, to have that awe for nature or for science, which I think is a common Christian thing. They're like, oh, look at the trees, man, you know, like, isn't it wonderful? It's like, yeah, I think it's wonderful. Does not point me to a God at all. At least not the Christian.
That's why I think,
yeah,
that's why I think that it's easy to try and lump it in with these religions that are available to us as Americans, especially with European heritage. And then even some other cultures, their descendants look at the cultures of their ancestors and they reflect it back to that. But I don't think that you need a specific religion in order to have that connection with nature and yourself.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We got like tons of calls on the queue tonight, guys. I'm really excited.
Oh my God.
So I want to ask Katie one more question before we kind of wrap things up here. When you were in high school with us, did you ever think in a couple of years you'd be on an atheist talk show with your friends Jenna and Dan?
No, I mean, I was one of those people who didn't really like fit in, but I was pretty like super Christian because my mom was a minister in the church. And so it was just kind of expected of me, you know, to be super Christian. And I was like basically the stereotypical Christian high schooler. I was like, I didn't like gays. I didn't like, I didn't like trans people. I was very Republican. In my worldviews. And then I went to college and it all just flip-flopped. And now I am gay and I'm liberal.
You know, it's our liberal indoctrination from our university systems. That's what it is. You know, we got that liberal disease, as some people call it. I don't know, but Katie, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to call into the show. Good to talk to you again, and really thrilling. Not very often I get to talk to people from Waco, and we get 2 of them tonight. So we'll definitely catch up in the future. And thanks again for talking to us tonight.
It was nice talking to you.
Really, really cool. I mean, like, it's so funny to see the connections in people's lives. Like, Katie is definitely a person I never would have thought that would have been as deep into the deconstruction.
Okay, I had an inkling because in senior year, not about her. I had an inkling that she was like one of us because me and Katie, we were in anatomy together and we vibed so hard. Like, we just sat and talked about Skyrim all day in a way that like other people don't talk, you know, like I was like, ooh, you're different.
You find that if you talk about Skyrim in a certain way, that is an indicator that you're in the LGBT community? Is that the argument you're laying out here?
Yes. There is gay people do things in so many like subtle ways. And because in American culture, you can't be gender nonconforming, like you have to just keep such an eye out. You have to be so watchful of like little things. But like, I don't know, the way that like, you could just tell, like she hung out with all these Christian girls and everything, but none of them would like just vibe and like be a dude with me, and not like girls can't game, but in that way, the not only talking about video games, but just things in general.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, it's again just really interesting to see where people are going, and I mean where we're all going. So we have lots of calls, like I said. So I want to jump into the next.
Yes, please.
Call here, I want to talk to Brian, who is calling in from Houston, Texas. Brian, what's going on?
Houston, Texas, baby.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. So I'm an agnostic, but I've been having kind of an ongoing discussion with a brilliant Christian friend of mine. And he shared with me an argument related to whether or not a belief in God is warranted. And so basically the idea is that whether or not a belief in God is warranted is going to depend on whether or not God actually exists. So like if man has been created by God in the image of God, then it seems probable that the human cognitive powers that produce a belief in God are working properly when they do produce a belief in God. And so my question is, do you agree with that? Or do you think that whether or not a belief in God is warranted is independent of whether or not God actually exists?
Yeah, so I've heard a version of this before. I don't know if I've heard it quite described in that way, but there's kind of these kind of definitional arguments really where it's like, well, if God was real, then by definition, the way that your brain works, you would be, if you have the capacity to have a belief in him, then he is real. I call them definitional arguments because to me, they only work in certain ways if you take certain definitions of things to be true. So like a version of this, and this is kind of not quite the same, but Alvin Plantinga has this argument about how we can't possibly be rational under like evolution because evolution doesn't, design
towards truth.
Lean towards truth, right? Doesn't necessarily lead us to be more rational. So there's no reason for us to trust our senses, right? But it's like, well, that's not, if you take evolution under that definition, saying that it can't happen, maybe, but like just because it's not likely doesn't mean that it's not possible either. And so I kind of see a version of this here where it's like, well, yes, there might be a possibility that this is true. Like this is a possible world that exists, you might be able to say, but like, that you still have to, there's still other ways that we can confirm whether that's true or not. And especially when we're talking about God belief, like what does God even mean in this specific argument? Presumably your Christian friend is talking about Yahweh, but you can use multiple different constructs of God. And it doesn't even have to be a single God. It could be multiple gods, like this kind of argument leads itself to be open to a couple of different flaws from my take.
Well, so I'm not sure I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but if you take issue with this argument because it doesn't lead you to a specific God, I'm not sure if I have a problem with that necessarily because I think.
Well, let me clarify real quick, Brian, because
okay.
It doesn't even have to be an identifiable God. It just has to be a God construct that I can understand. You see what I mean? Because people use different definitions of God. I'm not even talking about religious definitions of God. I'm talking about even non-religious definitions of God. You know what I mean? Like God can be defined in so many different ways here. It's almost meaningless in that sense, right?
Okay. So, I mean, kind of in this example, I think it was used in the context of like a designer God or a creator God. And I wanted to mention the point you made with the other call about like people who say, the trees and nature and things like that. To me, that's evidence God exists. I agree. I don't really find that reasonable, but like, I'm not sure how I could really argue against that. If God existed, maybe like a kind of an intuition, maybe not like, pointing to examples in nature, but maybe like a proclivity towards theism would be likely. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so as soon as I stopped talking, I immediately anticipated you going for the creator God route, right? Because that's what a lot of people who kind of use these arguments go for. They'll say, no. We don't even mean a specific God. We just mean like a creator. But even then, that's still vague enough. It's from my understanding anyway, to almost be meaningless in some sense. Like at best, what we see is creation, maybe. But again, that doesn't identify anything about how that got here. We don't understand the processes. We don't know if it's a being or multiple beings or anything. All we see is the stuff around us. And I can see that we have stuff around us, but whether or not the stuff around us came through a completely natural processes or through some sort of supernatural intervention, like on the face of it, that argument doesn't provide any evidence one way or the other. It just says that there's a possibility, or it looks like that it could have been that way, and something looking like it could be that way doesn't necessarily, make that true. Am I being clear, Brian?
Yeah, I think so. I guess, like, at best, this argument would just show that, like, you don't have a successful art, or that, like, an atheist couldn't argue against it, or against, like, nature being evidence for God per se, but that doesn't necessarily entail that nature is evidence for God. What do you think about arguments, like you said, this doesn't tell you anything about what God is like? What do you think about arguments like, arguments from a necessary being, which kind of aim to show that whatever the source or whatever, like, the ultimate foundation of reality is, has to be an agent, because in order to explain, like, why specific contingent things exist rather than other possible contingent things, there would have to be some kind of, like, decision made or some kind of agent. Are you familiar with any of those?
Yeah, I've seen those too. I think kind of to maybe elucidate what I was trying to say earlier is if someone were saying, oh, the reason why you're feeling this way is because of your bad energies or your bad chakras. Okay. Like you can posit that as a possible explanation, but I don't know what energies are. I don't know what chakras are. I don't know how to define that. So we're talking about the possible effects of something that we don't know the mechanics of. And so I can't demonstrate that this is proof of that thing existing if we haven't defined what the mechanics of that thing is, right? And so, like, if we're talking about a creator with intent, right? Okay, yeah, in retrospect, I think maybe we could make that argument for certain things, but it's kind of a just so argument, like I could win $1 million tomorrow, and I could say, well, it seems like there's a creator doing this for me. There seems like there's intent for this because I had ideas about what I would do for something, and this plan is kind of coming together. But that's all it looks like. It's just, it seems like something is, but until we can even identify that planner again, or even identify the plan, it's always going to be a just so argument. It's always going to be an argument made after the fact. It doesn't have any predictive power, right?
Sure.
I think one thing that I think about too a lot is if it's so unbelievable that we could just happen just because, why is that less believable than an eternal being with no beginning deciding to make us? Why is that then the more reasonable answer? Because that's the way people work. Like, people aren't the only people on the planet. Like, we're not the only living things on the planet. So why would it be that it has to be a human a human-like being like us, instead of it just being the, like, miraculous Big Bang or some like whatever did happen? Like, why? Yeah. Like, why is that so
Are you referring to,
obscure?
Like,
it's just because,
like,
that's not what we can.
And Brian was making the point too that a lot of apologists who use these arguments, they won't put any qualities to God outside of him being a creator, or maybe some other things here and there, because they're trying to make it. There's a minimalist God that they're trying to argue for. They have to strip away all these other things because you're right, you can't demonstrate any of those other qualities. But they think that there are some qualities you still can demonstrate. And my argument would be, even if you could demonstrate it, it's pretty weak, but I don't even think you get that far most of the time. Like I said, I think it's a lot of just so assumptions that you can make after facts are revealed. But yeah, Brian, you had something else you want to say?
No, I think that kind of answers my question. I mean, it seems to me that I agree with you. Like, it's just kind of after the fact rationalization, and it doesn't really add any kind of explanatory power. Or provide any kind of evidence for thinking a God exists. So
Yeah, it's post hoc, right? Like any of these kinds of arguments that you see about authors and intent, I could easily just say, yeah, the best explanation is aliens. Or, well, actually, they might say, well, it has to be a being outside of time and stuff, and like that's all nonsense too. That's a whole other thing. You'd have to dive into some physics and stuff on why that doesn't necessarily make sense. But
Yes.
point
It
is,
just sounds like man-made science fiction.
Yeah,
And
like
the whole Earth isn't revolved around the way that we perceive science fiction.
the way I see it, Brian, is if Christians had evidence of God for real, they wouldn't be making these kinds of arguments. The arguments we would be seeing would be much different. And I think that's something to think about as well. But yeah, good luck with trying to talk to your friend about some of this stuff. I know it gets kind of complicated really fast. And thanks again for calling in for the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for calling.
Yeah, so like I'd like to say I'm pretty good about talking about these kinds of arguments and stuff.
I think you're good.
Well, thank you. Well, the reason I'm saying it, right, is because I'm not really a debate person. I guess I'm not known for doing debates, but there's still ways you can kind of explain this stuff, or at least explain your point of view, I think, without necessarily getting into fights with people. As long as you're super clear about your definition. So like even there, I noticed that Brian was trying to argue or bring the point about just the regular creator God. And I noticed you chimed in about, well, how can God have these human qualities and stuff, right? And like that's a trap. That's a trap that a lot of apologists use. They want you to say that. They want you to go the extra mile so they can say, no, we're not even going that far. We're trying to make a smaller case. So it's something you got to look out for, and just being very, very careful with your terms when you talk about this stuff. So let's go ahead and jump to our next call here. We got Steph calling in from Texas. A lot of Texas calls tonight. What's going on, Steph?
Yes. Not too much. How about you both?
I'm doing just fine. Having a good time.
Good.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah. So what did you want to talk to us tonight about, Steph?
I was curious of what both of your opinions are on granting moral considerability to non-humans or non-human entities.
Yeah. So I'll go first on this, Jenna, and then I'll let you chime in on your thoughts. So I was talking with the crew about this. I've kind of gone vegetarian this week a little bit. When I went to the store, I was like, I'm just going to buy all fruits and vegetables and no meats here and see if I can even do this, because kind of going that route has been a consideration for me for a while. And so far, I've only been doing it for a few days, but I'm doing okay. Like I'm getting my protein from some other sources and stuff. People always ask me how I'm getting my protein, but I feel like it's something I can do. So I have been considering the vegetarian vegan route because I get more and more convinced every day, Steph, of the ethical arguments a lot of these advocates for vegetarianism and veganism have. Whereas, the lines that we draw when we consider other beings is kind of arbitrary. It's hard to, draw the line with morals, because most of you would have a problem with me killing your dog, but you wouldn't have a problem with me killing a chicken. Well, what's the difference there? Well, we might think of dogs as more conscious beings, but we also see other animals that are super conscious and definitely have, feelings and emotions, at least they look like that we do, right? Like cows are always the example that are brought into this. So we do kind of have these cultural assumptions that go into what's taboo and what's not for what we should eat. I do think it's a bit arbitrary. So I'm leaning more towards this idea that, might as well just don't have the conflict and not eat animals at all. That's where I'm at right now, at least leaning towards that way, much to the chagrin of some other people in the atheist community of Austin who are tired of having arguments about vegetarianism and veganism. I don't really mind it, but I'm kind of leaning towards that way, that the moral arguments we have for treating other beings differently is getting a bit arbitrary and should be examined. But I don't know. I honestly don't know your thoughts on this, Jenna. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
So basically, the question is: do like non-human things have morals? Am I understanding that right?
I think it's like how do we have a moral obligation to treat other biological entities the same or differently than we do with people, right? Right, Steph, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at the vegetarian or the veganism argument is, should we consider other animals having some moral weight to their existence?
Right.
If we were to put in front of you a human and another human, you would not be able to choose between them. You could maybe justify how, but morally you would be kind of in the gray or having a bad time either way. But if you took an animal and a human, some people might say, oh, we can choose one over the other. But then it becomes a slippery slope because it comes, what animal do we define as being worth more, having more value than the other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess the way that I think of it is, well, I have high blood sugar, so I can't go vegan. So I did go vegan for a while, but then I actually ran into health problems. So I do have to eat meat. But I think it's interesting because the reason why humans shouldn't eat other humans is because you're looking out for your own species. And if you look at animals, they do the same thing. I mean, there's some animals that will eat themselves, but you know, those aren't humans. So I guess I don't know. But animals are made cannibalistic. Like nature was designed for us to be able to eat other animals. And I think as long as you like the whole natural thing, like, do you go about it in a respectful to nature way? Because in the same way, you're also using nature whenever you're eating plants. All
right.
And I think
first thing, Jenna, I got to ask you. So you said that you have to eat meat because of your blood sugar levels, right?
Yeah.
If you had some way to supplement your blood sugar levels without eating meat, would you still consider eating meat to be ethically right or wrong? It sounds like it still doesn't matter to you.
I mean, I would do that. I would, if I could be vegan, I would, not because I disagree with eating meat, but because I disagree with the way meat is processed. I don't think that it's very respectful to the source.
Yeah. That's yeah. Okay. So,
yeah.
And also,
and animals would do the same thing. Like a bear would eat me, and I wouldn't say that that's a bad ethical choice for him because that's what he's designed to do.
I would agree with you there because like my cat is still going to eat meat even if I don't, because I know that's what's healthy for a cat. Now that gets really tricky too, because then we are choosing one life over another, right?
Well,
I am choosing.
Would you eat your cat?
Yeah.
You would not eat your cat because you're an American who was raised with the belief that cats are companions and not food. Cats were domesticated in order to fill that role by humans.
Yeah.
But in other cultures, they have those inhibitions. They will eat animals that are below them on the food chain because they don't have that cultural inhibition the way we do.
Sure. But the point I'm thinking of here, though, right, is like ultimately an animal had to die for my cat's meal. Now, I don't, well, maybe there are some options with like the, I don't know, the regular, like the pebbles and stuff. I don't know what the kibble, that's what I'm thinking of. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know people have kind of looked into that stuff. I haven't looked into too much of that personally. Maybe there is some sort of vegan option for cats. For as far as I know, there isn't. If there was,
there's an actual vitamin that they need that only comes from the meat. As far as I know.
But one day though, if we could like produce all the required vitamins and minerals in a lab, I think I would get Pico on that diet too, because that way I'm not creating a demand for a product that involves, you know, the unnecessary killing of a life. So yeah, like and I'm gonna keep trying out this thing, Steph. I'm gonna keep seeing where this diet gets me. And see where it goes. But
I can send you recipes because I have lots of vegan recipes that I can't use anymore.
I've teased on this show before. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe not. I don't know. I think this is the first time where I've actually put it into action here. And like I said, there's some turkey breast in the fridge that I got like a couple weeks ago, but that's like the only meat in this house right now. Everything else,
You can give that to Pico.
Yeah, maybe I can give that to Pico. So I'm becoming more convinced of it, Steph. But what's your take on all of it? I have a feeling I know what it is, but I'd like to hear you elucidate on it.
Well, you might be pleasantly surprised to hear my opinion. And it kind of goes back to one thing that you said and a separate thing that Jenna said. So Jenna brought up an example with the bear. If you were in a forest and you encountered a bear, even if you had a moral objection to eating the bear may not have the same feelings for you. And the same thing with the cats. We don't eat the cats. It's part of a social construct. We make social contracts with other humans and we say we're not comfortable doing this. And so we are averse to it. But so far with animals, we're not really able to bridge and make that social contract. So it comes down to, if you're looking at consciousness, are you open to treating non-human, non-biological beings or entities with moral consideration? So if you were to encounter a robot or an artificial intelligence, would you treat it more or less the same as a person or a biological entity? Or would you say because it's a constructed thing or find some other justification for not treating it or assigning it the same moral consideration that we do other people? Or with your case, Dan, some animals now?
Yeah. That's great questions too, Steph. I think I'm in the school of thought that AI will become developed enough to where we will treat them as persons. I think that's just a fact.
Yeah.
Because I ultimately think that we as human beings are mechanical in nature, and even my higher order level processing of consciousness is a result of physical processes. In the same way that if you give me a drug that's going to make me fall asleep, that's a result of physical chemical processes. If you say words to me that might hurt my feelings, that's a physical process as well. There's no difference between the two in the sense of it's reactions happening, and it can all be processed in a physical way. So yeah, I'm in that camp as far as, I think it's going to happen. I don't know if we're there yet, but inevitably, as long as we continue to develop as our technology goes, who knows? We might not even be here this time next year, but hey, one can hope, right? But anyway, Steph, thanks for calling and giving us a great question to talk about, because
really great to think about.
Give me a chance to talk about my potential vegetarian future. So thanks again. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. There you go. Pretty common to get people to ask me their thoughts about that kind of stuff, because I think it's a hot thing in the atheist community. It's the hot topic. And I get why people are annoyed by it, but ethics are important. Ethics are important.
Yeah. I think if you have the means to go vegan, you should, because people do know better than animals. Animals will eat other animals. That's what they're supposed to do. Humans are supposed to eat meat, but because we have the emotional capability to not, I think it's in general a good idea for us to not, especially whenever you take into consideration the way that meat is processed. I have way less of a problem with people going out in the woods and hunting an animal that's lived a happy life and appreciating what the animal is doing for you. But whenever you have these animals locked in cages in completely unnatural settings, that kind of makes that, like, it messes up the equation,
I would say more importantly than humans are designed to eat meat, or that humans were designed to intake proteins and minerals that we get from meat products, right? I think that's the important stressor, because we can still do that part, and we can do that without the suffering of animals, at least in theory. Okay,
so humans, we're not designed. Humans function off of the sustenance they can get from meat.
Sure.
That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah. We've evolved to be able to adapt to conditions. The conditions of our environment led us to evolve to eat meat and to benefit from it. But we can get those benefits ethically. I think we're at a point now where we can do it. Well, a lot of us can do it. There's still obviously problems of food scarcity around the world, and just a million other issues with it. But yeah, it's possible. It's possible that a human can live their life and do it that way. So anyway, we got some more calls here. I want to get to everybody who are still waiting on the line. So let's talk to Chris calling in Ohio. Chris, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I had this is like, I'm not interested in the superficial truth issue here, but more the meta issue.
Okay.
So I've got two kids, and one of them, when she was a toddler, repeatedly would spontaneously remark about things indicating that she had lived a previous life. Like, we would drive by a house, and she's like, oh, you know, when I was 16, I lived in a house that had windows like that. Or, you know, back when I had kids, I rode a horse that looked like that. And I'm a skeptic and an atheist, so that kind of freaked me out a little bit. And she has a really active imagination, but when she has an active imagination, she's telling me stories and things. But this is like completely spontaneous, like we're driving by something, and she makes a comment and just drops it after that. So I talked to her pediatrician. This is the thing I have a problem with, is my reaction to this. I talked to her pediatrician. I was like, hey, my kid keeps telling me, making statements about previous lives, and I find that a little weird. And he's like, no, every kid does that. Don't worry about it. And like, for the duration of the appointment, I was comforted by that. But as I was driving home afterwards, I'm like, wait a sec, that's fucked up. Why should I be comforted by the fact that
it's like, what's the larger implication here? Yeah.
Yeah, because like I was thinking about it, like I live in a state that has bears, but there are no bears around my neighborhood. So like if my kid came in and said, hey, I saw a bear on the street, I'd probably ignore it. But like if I talk to a few neighbors and they're like, hey, my kids are all saying they saw a bear on the street, I would kind of assume, you know, more witness testimony makes it more true. But somehow I felt comforted by the fact that more people, more children are reporting this phenomenon. And I find that really weird. Like, why did I find the doctor saying every kid reports past lives evidence that they don't exist?
Well, it's almost like a Peter Pan situation, right? Like, oh, you forget what it was like to be a kid, you know, like with Hook, you know, with Robin Williams, you know, like that's kind of what it is. Like, what if kids have kind of these special powers, which is interesting. Now, Chris, you actually messaged this to me on Twitter a few days ago before this show. So I actually had some time to think ahead of time, which I don't normally get to do with most calls on this. And when you sent me this message talking about this, it reminded me of the story of Sea Org, and Sea Org being, of course, the branch of Scientology that was out on the sea trying to find treasure. And so, like, when the leaders of Scientology, whose name escapes me at the moment, he was trying to convince the people. L. Ron Hubbard, thank you so much. He was trying to convince the people on his boat, like, hey, because they didn't have any sailing experience, right? These were just people from his church that they took out on the sea to help find treasure that L. Ron Hubbard said that he buried in a previous life. Spoiler alert, he was making stuff up the whole time. But what he told the crew was, hey, all of you guys were seamen in your past lives. Come on, you can do this. And basically, like, gaslighted them into thinking that they had the abilities of a top-notch sailor because they had one in their past life. And so, like, I tell that story because if you talk to your kid and you ask your kid, you lived a previous life, huh? Well, I guess you can drive this car, you know, because you know how to do this. Like, I mean, like, chances are if you tried to demonstrate anything from a previous life, or if you tried to get somebody else who also was at the same time of a previous life, or what they claim, you know, all they can tell you is stories. It's going to be really hard for them to demonstrate anything outside of just telling stories. And something that we talked on the show once before was, isn't it interesting how when people talk about their previous lives, they were always Jesus, or they were always, somebody cool in history, and not like Genghis Khan or Hitler or anybody else. Because, like, statistically speaking, some of those people who are going to have past lives are going to be shitty people too. But, I think it does come down to this fact that, yeah, kids do tell stories, and people tell stories too, whether sometimes unconsciously. But yeah, like I think the human imagination is what is the culprit here at the end of the day. And I can see how hearing like, oh, all kids do this, maybe there's something bigger to it. Yeah, well, the something bigger to it is the kids just have better imaginations than maybe we as adults do sometimes. And I would chalk that up to being that. Yeah.
Couldn't it also be that kids see?
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
My question is, why do we hear that all kids do it, and we use that to dismiss it?
Well,
like,
I mean,
because normally, like, if I said, hey, every once in a while I wake up with a sore neck, and you're like, yeah, everyone has that. We wouldn't use that like dismissively, but we say like, hey, my kid is reporting a past life, and the doctor says, yeah, every kid does that, and somehow that's evidence that it's not true. It just seems really weird, because normally the more people you have testifying,
consensus should make something more real, right? Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. I'd say the difference kind of there is, if somebody has a sore neck, we can look at that, and we can use a set of criteria to determine that neck is sore. We can look at cause and effect relationships behind that. And we can also look at cause and effect relationships as to why a kid would tell a story too. And it's not necessarily going to be, because they actually lived this past life. Maybe that kid wants attention in that moment, or maybe this is sometimes it's a way for kids to deal with traumatic experiences as well. I mean, there's a variety of mechanics that we can use to explain why it's happening, and it may not just be out of hand. I think it may seem like it's out of hand because there's a wide variety of explanations, but I'd say that's the difference there. We can at least point to some rationalizations as to why. Whereas if everybody woke up with a sore neck, that would be weird, because if we can't point to the cause of that, that's different, right? Whereas I think we can point to the cause for a lot of kids, but
Yeah, I've been disturbed by this for like probably 7 years. The fact that I'm a skeptic and an atheist, but somehow I took comfort in the fact that, tons of kids say this happened to them. And I'm like, why should that reassure me? Like, that should make me more concerned about it, the fact that it's a widespread phenomenon. But somehow, when I first heard it, I was like, oh yeah, every kid says this. It's okay. It's not true. But like, it would seem that more testimony would like drive me towards considering.
I think, a difference here too, though, Chris.
I don't believe in it, but
yeah, like the testimony of the kids. Like, if two people are testifying about a sore neck, again, like, we can use the same criteria to evaluate whether that's true or not. Two kids are going to tell two different stories, and there's, I don't know, it's just, it's out of the realm. Again, like, it's out of the realm of examination, because we don't even understand the mechanisms of how that would be true. It's not. It certainly could be. It could be possible, right, that all these kids are living past lives in some sense, but in some sense it also isn't true because of the way that population growth works and stuff. But like, we just have to look at Occam's razor. I think Occam's razor would tell us that, yeah, kids are really good at making up stuff, because you could use this same argument of saying like, well, why do so many people have God experiences? And I can't tell you the exact specific reason why millions of people around the world claim that they've experienced God. I can give you broad explanations for individual cases that could act as explanations, but that's not necessarily going to lead me to believe that those God experiences are best explained by God. So there you go. I think I got a good analogy there. Maybe not.
It's the opposite in this case. It's
Wait,
the
why you
opposite
say
in
that?
this case. With God experiences, we're not saying everyone has God experiences, therefore it's not true. So with the kids, we're saying a lot of kids say this, therefore it's not true.
But I'm not saying a lot of kids have experiences, therefore it's not true. That's not the argument I'm making. I'm saying that we have explanations as to why a kid could tell stories. And Occam's razor would believe us to follow those explanations rather than past life is real.
Oh yeah, and I don't believe in past lives. I'm just fascinated by the fact that evidence of multiple people saying the same thing is taken as proof that it's not real, and that's something like initially I accepted too. It just seems really weird to me. Like everyone thinks this, therefore we don't have to take it into account. It seems strange.
Well, it's kind of like if we can't test all of the kids' stories, but we can at least take a small. Let's say we have 100 kids who tell these stories, and we can definitely confirm that 20 of those kids are definitely not telling the truth. I mean, without looking, we can assume that more kids are also not going to be telling the truth, and maybe not all of them are, but with something as radical as that, again, it's not what's simplest here in this circumstance. And my argument isn't, so many kids tell these stories, therefore that makes it less true. It's just more so there's an easier explanation for a broad majority of these kids' stories. And even if we can't explain all of them, we can at least extrapolate that there is going to be a reason that we can get to, and not, that past lives are real. So
yeah. I don't believe that. I was disturbed that kind of logic had power for me.
Yeah, and people ask us too, like as atheists, do we ever doubt about certain things? Like, could God ever be real for me? And it's like, some construct of God, maybe not Yahweh though, and maybe this is one of those things where it's like, could past lives be real? Maybe some form of that, but at the end of the day, you and I, Chris, we're not going to believe it. So that's just, It is what it is.
Nope.
But thanks for calling in, Chris. I appreciate the call.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And looking forward to hearing from you again soon. I know you had some thoughts in there, Jenna.
Oh yeah. I was going to say that my theory is that kids hear adults talk about their past and they mimic that. And I feel like that's what they're doing. And because so many kids are kids are so weird in so many ways, and it's hard to say what weirdness are they performing that's not normal. And for them to have something weird that they're all doing that is normal, that a lot of kids do, and it turns out these kids are fine, that's why it's okay.
Yeah, and
we've seen it in history that kids have done this, and then it's always turned out fine. Therefore, you shouldn't have to worry.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it that the reasons why a kid would make up a story about a past life, an adult would tell a story about a past life, there might be two different kinds of motivations there. Maybe sometimes it's the same thing, but isn't it interesting that an adult might have different motivations? It could be like getting money out of people or trying to impress, gain some sort of social
and a kid just sees that. Yeah, a kid just sees that whenever their parents tell them a story about their past, they're like, whenever I was this age, I went and did this. And the kid thinks it's cool to hear that. So the kid mimics that. They tell a story whenever I was this age. They don't realize that the adult is actually telling a true story. They think the adult's telling a story. So they're trying to tell a story in the same way the adult is, because the adult gets a good reaction from the people around them. That's what I think is happening.
Yeah. That's a good explanation as to why something like this might happen. But we got to move on because we got two more calls that I want to get to before the end of the show here. I want to talk to Kevin, who is calling in from New York. Kevin, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, you guys.
Absolutely. How can we help you today?
Hey, well, I wanted to talk about the Bible.
Okay.
And how I can try to express the validity of the Bible to you guys. And the curious relationship between 2 Peter and Jude and the New Testament specifically.
Okay, you said express the validity of the Bible, so you're saying the whole book, all 66 books.
Okay. Well, yeah, because I can give you an idea of how it's valid. Because by explaining this to you, you can then use the same tools to try to work this out for yourself.
I mean, I think I could give you an idea of how it's valid too, but I guess I'm more interested in how you can demonstrate the truth of the claims made in the Bible.
All right. Well, the subject I called it. Well, I wanted to tell you guys the curious relationship between 2 Peter and Jude in the New Testament. Now, biblical scholars have long noted that there's a lot of similarities between 2 Peter and Jude. In fact, there are only 7 verses in the entire letters that don't have a noticeable parallel. I guess you could then say that 72% of the verses in the letter of Jude have been incorporated in the structure of 2 Peter. Now,
okay.
Well, yeah.
I'm listening. I'm trying to see what the point is, but yeah, you obviously have more to say, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, with that known, that there's very much a lot of similarities between the two. The two can then be combined into a third letter, which is more comprehensive. And that puts up an argument for their inspiration.
Their inspiration? What do you mean?
Yes. Their inspiration from God. Now, when you...
Wait, hold on, I don't understand. You have to explain this to me. So 2 Peter does make references to the Epistle of Jude. That much is true. But how does putting them together make them the divine inspiration? I mean, first of all, if we're going to get into this, right, the vast majority of biblical scholars do not attribute 2 Peter to Peter at all. Did you know that?
Did I know they didn't attribute it at all? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Like out of all the books of the New Testament of the letters, like 2 Peter is one of draws some of the most consensus amongst biblical scholars of not having original authorship from Peter. There's other New Testament books as well that are, supposedly written by Paul, some of which we can confirm are definitely not. Some are more up to debate, but 2 Peter is one of those ones where, yeah, most people agree who study the issue say it was not written by Peter, mainly because of the approximation of its date, which was long past the life of when Peter would have actually lived.
Well, I see where you're going with this, but it's also an important fact to take into consideration that I got this idea from Matt Delhante without even talking to him, in which he says that a lot of these texts borrow from one another. And
that much is true.
But yes, but the issue is that even amongst the denominations out there, there isn't a there's a consensus to put the apocryphal books in the background, which is a mistake.
Okay, I have no idea what that has to do with what we're talking about.
Well, even just like I explained to you that 2 Peter and Jude have similarities to them. Well, the book of Jude itself borrows from apocryphal books.
Sure.
In fact,
The Book of Enoch, in particular.
not only the Book of Enoch, but an apocryphal text that we no longer have, which belongs to the New Testament, which is known as the Assumption of Moses.
Yes.
But
so, if anything, doesn't that kind of demonstrate the unvalidity of the Bible? The fact that the Bible itself or texts within it are borrowing from apocryphal texts, that is, texts that aren't deemed canon by the church?
No, because it is also demonstrated in the Bible that the church is going to be a hindrance to the truth, and then by doing so, fulfilling prophecy.
Okay, I don't want to be that guy, but we are kind of getting towards the end of the show, and I do have another caller. I guess I'm really struggling to kind of see what your point in all this. So far, you've told me that they're making references to apocryphal texts and to other texts in the New Testament in 2 Peter and in Jude, which is true. I grant you all of that, but I have yet to see what that means for the divine inspiration of these texts, because I'm curious how you can demonstrate that just by saying, oh, these books reference each other. That doesn't mean that God inspired them to me.
Well, we gotta ask the question, well, if they have similarities, then why not the entire book itself? There are still 7 verses within both of those books that still have a hint of a personal touch to it, which indicates that in order to then spread the truth to believers and those who study this diligently, it's necessary to take account that it was inspiration of the Holy Spirit and not by these people who are actually writing these books.
We haven't even gotten that far yet. I don't even understand. Look, I can write a book, and Jenna can take some ideas from that book and, reference my book and incorporate it into hers. How does that lead to the conclusion that it was written by the Holy Spirit? I don't know how you're coming to this. Like, I'm really struggling here to understand how you can convince me of this, because I have no idea what you're trying to demonstrate right now.
Well, just the fact that, I can give you an example of how these two have similarities.
I don't. I already know that they have similarities, Kevin. I know that already. We've discussed this. I want to know, how do you know that these texts were inspired by God or the Holy Spirit?
Because it seems like even if you were to take into account the time of Jesus, the apostles themselves had many times where they even didn't understand what was being taught to them, but that was surprisingly by the design of God as well.
Okay, again, what does this have to do with the text being written by the Holy Spirit? So the apostles may have misunderstood the sayings of Jesus. Okay, so what? I'm trying to get to a conclusion here,
Okay, well, the combination of these, the point I'm trying to make is combine these texts to make a more comprehensive text of 2 Peter and Jude, which denotes that there was a need. There was the design by the Holy Spirit that during our time there was a need to provide more information to believers.
No, Kevin, combining texts does not demonstrate that the Holy Spirit is a thing. I'm sorry. I'm asking you a very specific question, and I'm going to ask you this one more time because I'm really curious as to how you came to this conclusion. But if this conversation keeps up the way it is, I'm going to have to move on because I've gone over this several times. How did you come to the conclusion that the Holy Spirit divinely inspired these texts? What led you to that point? Give me a step-by-step process here.
Okay, well, the Bible is diverse in characteristics just as it is in origin, and the authors of both 2 Peter and Jude are different authors. So, the fact that there are any similarities at all are surprising, but
it's not surprising. It's not surprising at all, Kevin.
It's useful.
Why was
because
that
you can
surprising?
work these things out for yourself.
No. Why is it, Kevin? Why is it surprising that Christians in the Christian community are taking works from each other and using it to inspire their own written works? Why is that surprising?
Well, because it's written around the same time, and both, whether or not you believe Peter is the author of 2 Peter and Jude is the author of Jude, they, of course, written their books at different times, different locations, and so it shouldn't have that many similarities at all.
I don't know. I disagree. Like, it's the writers of the New Testament, right? Like, a lot of them weren't going in blind with some of these texts. It's not like that the texts that we have today are the only things written about Christianity during that time. It's just what we have that's left from that time. As you mentioned, there's other New Testament apocrypha that we don't even have the text of. We just know the titles of. And people were searching and looking at this. And obviously, you've already told me that Jude is taking from other apocrypha. So we know that the author is reading these texts. If your conclusion is that it's a coincidence or that he came up with this on its own without reading the texts, then I would say you have no evidence of that. If anything, we have evidence that they did look at these texts and just copied it. And copying a text is not evidence of divine inspiration.
I hear everything that you're saying, but we also have to take into account that, like I said earlier in this call, the church really is going to serve as a hindrance to the truth, because we've always had these church leaders who for carnal reasoning, for self-benefit,
Kevin,
organize the canon.
I gotta stop. You're right. The church does hindrance the truth, but maybe we would disagree on how exactly that's done. I enjoy the conversation we had so far. If we had more time, I'd love to explore it. But next time, I really would like just a point-by-point discussion on the Holy Spirit, how it, inspired the text, and how we can demonstrate that to be true. Because that's what I was interested in this conversation. And the fact that the church decides the canon, and this other stuff about changing the truth, I mean, that only gives evidence to me. I think that these are humanly inspired texts, not necessarily divinely inspired. But next time, Kevin, maybe we can get to it. But we got to move on because we got to wrap it up with one more call here, because I said I was going to take it, and we'll be really, really quick. And then we're going to go to Discord right afterwards. So Omniskeptic from Ontario, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Canadian.
Hey there. I know we're low on time. I'll try to keep it very brief, if you don't mind. I'd like to lay out my argument essentially front to back, and then you can just interrupt if you disagree with something.
Sounds good. I like it, Omniskeptic. You're speaking my language. Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. So what I consider to be the most robust ethical philosophies center around maximizing happiness and minimizing harm. And so we end up in these sort of heart-wrenching scenarios where sometimes, something happens, like we might have to put our pets down if they're in excessive pain or something like that. And the thing is pets, they don't really know when they're in the state where, they need to opt out. They'll just endure the suffering until they just die of natural causes. And even if they did know it was best for them, they don't really have the means to, end their life painfully.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first point. The second point is that generally, at least amongst humans, we have a negativity bias, which is we react more intensely emotionally to negative things over positive things. And this is a byproduct of evolution, essentially, right? You want to avoid false negatives and less than false positives. So if there's you want to basically assume that there's an enemy in the bushes rather than accidentally miss an enemy in the bush.
Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to other species, we'll start here. I think that not only that it can be ethical, but that we might actually be in the case where it is the ethical thing to do, where we as a society should be employing mass genocide on other species in order to save them the terribleness of their existence.
Yeah. So I anticipated that this is where this argument was going to go.
That's crazy.
So I prepared some thoughts, at least while you were talking. So this is like, this is anti-natalism to an extreme, to an extent. And so you're not the first to talk about this idea. So this is, I know that you've obviously thought about this yourself. And by that logic, if we understand that we are stopping the propensity for populations of beings to reproduce and stuff, which I'm assuming you were getting to. I don't think you actually said that point, but that was your next point, right? Like we're stopping people from reproducing. Yeah. Therefore, we're ending the continued suffering. So like I happen to kind of be an anti-natalist myself when it comes to human beings, right? I don't plan on having kids of my own. And maybe if I did, we'll see how I feel about it afterwards. But like for me, it's an ethical decision not to have kids of my own breed, shall we say. I'm not producing them, right? For the same reasons that you've outlined. But there is also a difference between me choosing not to bring a new life into this world and ending a life that's already in this world. And so, yeah, that there is some fuzziness there. And
what is the difference between those two?
The difference is one is a conscious being that already exists and is already living.
That's what you said, right? You said one was living and one is not yet living, but you said that there was a difference in killing versus choosing not to reproduce. I'm wondering what the ethical difference there is.
Because if someone wants to live, I'm denying them their consent by killing them. Okay. So
but when we have things like my argument specifically was starting at pets, because pets, you don't ask your pet, do you consent to being put down? You just do it because it's best for them.
Yeah, pets cannot verbally consent to things, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't communicate in other ways.
They can't even mentally, conceptualize it. It's not like there's a communication barrier is the problem. The problem is they can't even imagine, I want to die. That is the preferable option here. You have to do the thinking for them.
That's debatable. I mean, certainly amongst a lot of lower order animal species, I'd say you're correct. I don't know if my dogs back in Waco, if I'm pretty sure I think that they have a high enough understanding of the world to where they at least understand when things do die and that they wish to not die themselves or would want to prevent themselves from dying. I mean, if they really wanted to die, they could, but like that's not within them to have that want. They're trying to survive just as much as any other species, right?
Sorry, can I just? I didn't mean to pick on your claim that they want to live.
Okay.
My bone to pick was that when we put an animal down, we are saying we know that you don't actively want to die, and yet we're getting rid of you anyway.
Yes, but we're also ending suffering in that sense too. Because I'm also someone.
You don't get the consent of an animal before you put it down, even though it has a want that contradicts, wanting to die. You still do it anyway because you know it's best. So I'm wondering what the ethical distinction is between forcing it on an animal and forcing it on a human. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of like euthanasia and stuff, right? I think so your point is more clear now to me. Because with humans, right, we can, for the most part, get consent, not all the time either. But we collectively decide sometimes the fate of our fellow man as to, when they have the right to
right to end their own lives. I happen to be a proponent of people who, at that stage of life, under specific circumstances, right, and they have to be very specific, that they have the choice to end their lives when appropriate, right? And so you're right. Pets, they can't really say that to us. They can't say, "Oh, I'm old now and my bones ache, and this cancer is killing me, so please just kind of, do it for me." And yeah, we do choose to end the lives of our pets in that way, and because we have an idea of what their suffering is going to look like, but they may not have to. And that's a fuzzy line, because like I also, if I do have a kid, I'm going to get that kid vaccinated, whether he wants to get a shot in him or not. And that's going to cause him that harm in that moment, even though he doesn't want it. But because, as a parent, I'm going to have that role. And I think maybe that's how we see our pets, kind of as children, as caretakers. And, I would also argue, Omniskeptic, I like the name, that pets do kind of give consent to us being their caretakers in some ways. They don't. Well, maybe I don't want to go that route, but like pets do seem to like us for the most part. They do seem to trust us, at least the ones that we treat well. And so in that way, they kind of do give our consent, but maybe that is a controlled consent basically we are the hand that feeds.
I'm not sure that I would want to go down that
I don't know
either. I mean, you're basically saying that an animal wants to live, but they trust us, so we're okay with betraying that trust.
Well, they can, in the same way.
Well, for you, when I go to something like the elderly, like you were talking about.
Yeah, if I'm 12 years old, I'm going to trust my dad that he's going to make the decision because he's smarter than me, And
right.
it's
when you have something like consent. My point here is that the consent, if you're lacking from an animal, the consent becomes largely irrelevant, right? You don't care about it, and so I'm wondering why, when it comes to humans, do you say, oh, well, suddenly we care about the consent and we're going to ignore the fact that we know better than the other human?
Yeah, I do see where it gets tricky. Especially when it comes to sickness, because sickness itself, we're talking about humans, if we're talking about people who have problems with understanding reality at a certain age, whether it's Alzheimer's or whatever, like their consent is diminished in some sense too, right? So it makes it even trickier. I don't know.
Point, which is interesting. Like in Canada, we just had made legislation proposed that will essentially allow people to opt in to have assistance in dying, even if they're not terminal or something of that sort, which is great. And that's totally an awesome discussion. I totally support that. But I'm making a stronger claim here. Right. I'm not talking about sickness. I'm talking about we can demonstrate by negativity bias that on average our lives should be more negative than not right now. And that's you can look back in history and look through evolution by natural selection in order to see just how many things have to die miserably in order for the select few to survive. I mean, humans, we have one kid every 9 months if you're producing every year. Other species have way more, and way more of their litter dies. And so the point here is to say that we have to end this massive amount of suffering, but the only way to do that is essentially through mass genocide. Not only of other species, but perhaps humanity last. We're the last ones to turn off the light. We have to get rid of the other ones because the other animals don't know well enough to get rid of themselves.
Yeah. We're the ones that are euthanizing the dog at the end of the day. The dog isn't euthanizing itself. Yeah.
But isn't that also us pushing our values onto other things? Like when it's a pet, we've bred them to be in our life. And so, I mean, you could kill all dogs, but but other animals weren't they're not us. So we need to not push our, if you're going to talk about killing all other living things because of a human's ethics, maybe we should mind our own business. Does that? I don't...
So we shouldn't be concerned about animal suffering. Is that what you're saying? Human values do not apply to
we can't do anything about animals that we don't see, but whenever we see it, we are empathetic, so it affects us, so we want to stop it so that we're more comfortable. I think that's really what the root of it is.
Yeah, and to Jenna's point, I guess, if I see an eagle pick up a mouse, There's going to be suffering both ways. Either the eagle doesn't eat or the mouse dies, right?
Yeah, and we just need to stay in our own lane if we can help it.
Yeah, I don't know, but I what I'm struggling with is, do we need to stay in our own lane? Because that's the point that I think Omniskeptic brings up.
Imagine the trolley problem, and imagine saying, "Oh, I wouldn't want to push my values on that one person to save the other four." It's like, no. We impose our values on each other all the time. That's what voting is. We say we value freedom over your authoritarianism, for instance.
Yeah, but animals are fascists. They don't believe in democracy.
They don't.
But yeah, okay. So I think I can't confidently give an answer to the objections you're bringing up here. It's something I probably have to think about more, because you brought stuff to me that I haven't analyzed it in quite this. I haven't analyzed it through this lens.
For the viewers, that you don't all go killing everybody that you see. The answer here, the flaw in the argument, that of course these wonderful people I'm talking to didn't have enough time to root out, is that there's no painless means of committing genocide, right? If you take one part of the ecosystem down, it's just going to cause mass chaos for everybody else. If you try to, for instance, eliminate humans, they're going to revolt. They're going to fight back. You can't do it.
Well, there are ways you can do it without people fighting back. Are
we going to talk about killing everyone?
I'm just saying there are ways. There are ways. It's possible.
There's amazing things you can convince.
We have enough nukes in the world to make it happen.
We can convince them to do it themselves. You can convince people of anything, I think. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, it's true.
It's for the greater good. Kill yourself. Don't.
Yeah. No, great.
Good luck. Good luck on telling people to kill themselves, because it's the rational thing to do. I don't think you're going to have much success, but you could try.
And we shouldn't, because
people do
it.
But people do that every day. It's not everybody, but people
do it. Yeah, they do it in specific instances. They don't do it en masse on a societal level.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. That would be really hard to do. To psychologically convince someone on a mass level. I don't know if that's possible, unless we develop a technology significant enough to alter the way that we think in that kind of way. But definitely not currently feasible. So yeah, this was interesting. This is different. I'm glad we could end this show on genocide. Really, that's always what I like to do with these kinds of things. So Omniskeptic, thanks for calling in, and thanks for giving us a jolly old chat about killing everybody.
Yeah, my vote is for poisoning the water supply.
Anyway, have a good night, guys.
Yeah, have a good one. And with that, we are a little bit over time tonight, so we're going to try to go through these plugs real quickly. First, I want to give special thanks, Jenna H. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming on. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, where can people find you at?
Most places it's just Princepsed, PRINCEPSED. Instagram is my favorite, but I also have Facebook, and then JBHOK on our station.
Yeah, and Jenna is going to be joining us in just a second for the after show Discord, so stick around, folks, if you want to keep talking to us and join us on there. It's going to be really cool. But
someone give me an opportunity to make an embarrassing story about Dan, because I have some.
Oh yeah, or give us more reasons why we should mass genocide everybody. I think that's,
and more methods.
More methods too. That's really good. So if you want, if you're not watching this live and you can't join us on the Discord, but you want to talk to me, you can do that by my email. It's truth@atheist-community.org. And that's where I get all inquiries on the show. You can also follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. And we have a Facebook group too. It's the Truth Wanted Facebook. You can look that up. And you can find this show as well on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts, and of course on YouTube, which you should like and subscribe this video if you're watching it on there. Really quickly as well, I gotta point out, we have super cool merchandise in our store.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that stuff.
Swaggy.
It's so cool.
Ooh,
Get yourself a nice black t-shirt for this hot weather.
Oh man, so edgy.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. So yeah, go
be that kid that walks out in the 103-degree weather in a black hoodie.
Absolutely. bit.ly/AEN- merch, I believe bit.ly/AEN merch is the link for that. If you want to check that out. Also, please consider donating on Patreon. It's patreon.com/truthwanted. It helps people know that, hey, this show is worth investing in because we're all volunteers that help make this thing happen. And
support small business.
Yeah, well, yeah. Support the ACA. The ACA is cool. And this show in particular is really, really cool.
I think so.
I think so too. I think it's pretty neat. You can also, if you feel so inclined, go on our YouTube memberships and donate there. You get a little emoticon, a couple different emoticons.
Look, I drew those too.
Yeah, you should make more.
Of you.
We should.
Yeah.
We should work on that.
Perhaps I will.
Yeah, and last but not least, folks, this show could not happen every single week without the awesome help of the wonderful ACA crew. Show yourself.
Hey, look at them. Look at there's a cat too.
That's a cute little cat. Thanks so much, guys. You're the best. I love you. And this show is better with you guys for sure. Anyway, Jenna, before we go, if you had to choose a way to mass genocide everybody, what would you choose?
Well, I already said poison the water supply. I think that'd be the easiest, but I would really love to find a way to slowly convince everyone over time to do it themselves. That'd be really interesting.
God, that's sinister. That's ooh. I'd rather do the quick and painless, go nuke style, baby. I want a Fallout situation. I think that'd be the best, but
nuke style would kill animals. So
yeah,
but wait, that one guy wanted to kill all the animals anyway, so that'd work fine for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, until next time, folks, remember to always keep wanting the truth, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, get smart.
But the show has ended. Goodbye.
What are we doing, man? What are we doing?